From Wispolitics in Madison, you're listening to Capital Chats.
Hello, everybody. This is Kate Morton with Wispolitics, here with a Capital Chats podcast brought to you by Spectrum. Today, I'll be sharing an interview with Dem gubernatorial candidate Mandela Barnes. He's a former U.S. Senate candidate and the former lieutenant governor of the state as well. Here's what he had to say. All right. Well, thanks for Mandela for joining me on the podcast today. I think to get us started off, let's talk a little bit about why did you decide to run for governor and what are some of your biggest priorities if you're elected to office?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. Really excited to talk about this race. I'm excited to be in it. But I'm running because it is a very difficult and critical moment for the state of Wisconsin, as it is all across the country. But we see continued costs rise in housing, groceries, utilities, you name it, everything, healthcare. And it feels as if we have a president in Donald Trump who has very little concern with everyone else's or with everyone else's issues in this country. If you're not him, if you're not his immediate family or his inner circle of wealthy donors, then you haven't enjoyed many benefits from the Trump presidency. And that's a shame because life is getting tougher for folks playing by the rules, working hard. It's not the same ticket to the middle class that it used to be. Now, I'll talk about my grandfather, my story, how I ended up here in this place. And it's because my grandfather, after his service in the Navy during World War II, he was able to get a job at A.O. Smith as a union steelworker. He walked in the building one day and effectively walked out 35 years later. And that was the ticket to the middle class for him. It's what created the foundation to make my story possible. And it feels that it's so difficult for people in my age group, and especially people who are younger than me, to be able to get that same entry point into the middle class. And it's because of corporate greed. The factory that my grandfather worked at, the factory where my dad worked, they don't even exist anymore. It's because those jobs were shipped overseas. And we see this same story played out over and over again all across Wisconsin. We see factories shuttered in more rural parts of the state. And we also see the consolidation of family farms. We see rural communities being hollowed out. We see this destabilization of entire economies because of corporate greed. There is more and more money going into fewer and fewer hands. And that is the problem, and that is why we face so many of the significant challenges that we face as a state or as a country. And it's not about left or right. It's not urban and suburban or rural. This is about the top versus the bottom. It's about the folks who get everything and everybody else who's been left behind. And that's why I'm running for governor, to reject that way of thinking, to reject the Washington way and embrace the Wisconsin way of doing things that actually provides and offers opportunities to everybody.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that. I want to ask you, about some of the big topics in the race. So let's get started off with, data centers. They're a huge issue in Wisconsin right now, with this new boom in projects in the state. So I'm wondering, what kind of safeguards would you want to see to address some of the concerns about, higher costs and potential environmental impact on that?
Absolutely. And what I'll say is that we've seen these tech companies take over so many facets of our lives. And it feels intrusive, it feels sort of predatory at times as well. And these data centers come across as a physical manifestation of it all. It feels as if the voice of the people that has been expressed over and over again, the will of the people, has been ignored when these conversations come up. And that's the problem. If there are going to be data centers here, what we need is a set of strict statewide standards. We need a playbook that allows for people across Wisconsin and whatever community you may reside in to be able to voice your concerns and actually have those concerns heard. And that's not what we've been seeing. We've been seeing these secrecy deals. We have non-disclosure agreements being signed, and people have no idea what is going on in their backyard, and that's completely unacceptable. So, along with those statewide standards, there has to be community input and community buy-in, ultimately a community benefits agreements or a community benefits agreement, which ensures that water quality is going to be protected. And also ensuring that people's rates are not going to be going up for energy bills and that air quality as well as land use is appropriate for the community that they reside in. These are very, very, very simple requests that people have. And all they're asking is for any sort of business that comes into the community to be a good neighbor. If you can't be a good neighbor, you should not be in the community. It's as simple as that. And addition to these sets of statewide standards, there has to be ongoing reporting to ensure that these companies are upholding their end of the bargain. If it can't be done, it has no place in Wisconsin.
Yeah, another issue that kind of ties into the concern about, um, costs for Wisconsinites is utility rates, which you've recently announced a policy on that. You said you would only appoint people to the Public Service Commission who agree to freeze rates. So I wanted to ask you about that because, under state law, PSC is required to approve rates that allow utilities to cover reasonable costs and give them the opportunity to earn a profit. So I'm just wondering, how would you ensure that appointees can freeze rates while also complying with those requirements?
Well, I'll tell you, being able to reasonably turn a profit doesn't include significant, huge executive bonuses at a time where people are struggling to keep the lights on. Uh, Acting reasonably doesn't include spending millions of dollars on lobbying and other political expenses. So, if we're going to talk about being reasonable, it is, again, it goes back to that good neighbor concept where if you're providing this public service to people all across this state. When I say public service, this is a necessity. There is the PSC is set up for a reason, the Public Service Commission. We want the Public Service Commission to act in the interest of the public versus the interest of profit for these for-profit companies. And it speaks to the system, the game being rigged against all of us because we see families that are rationing food and medicine just to keep the heat on in the dead of winter. And at the same time, some of these greedy monopolies, these utility monopolies, post the highest profits across the entire country. And again, those big bonuses and million-dollar checks that go towards lobbying, political expenses, you name it. Expenses that don't include being able to generate energy more efficiently in this state or provide reasonable service to people across Wisconsin. And I'm telling you, we're not going to stop there. We're also going to ban ratepayer dollars from being used on lobbying and other political expenses. And we're going to cap executive pay for utility execs.
Yeah, thanks. I also wanted to ask you about ICE and immigration enforcement, another big issue, particularly following the killing of two American citizens in Minnesota by immigration agents. Are there any specific measures you support to address immigration enforcement, such as, limiting where agents can make arrests, for example?
For sure. And if I could just take 1 second back on the utility piece, because
Yeah, sure.
I do want to remind people, because it didn't get covered. There was a rate freeze in 2017. 9 years ago, there was a 2 year rate freeze. I want people to be reminded that this is something that can happen. This is something that will happen in my administration. And now, in terms of ICE, now the problem is that we have not had comprehensive immigration reform in this country. That is the bottom line, is what has opened the door to a President Donald Trump being able to enact a level of incompetence across city streets in America. We see a private police force that has come in and made chaos, that has made people feel less safe. Everybody can agree that if a person's committed a violent crime, if they're wanted for a violent crime and they're in this country illegally, that person should be deported. That's common sense. That's not what's happening. ICE, as you mentioned, has killed American citizens. But before they killed American citizens, we saw U.S. citizens being detained for no real crime other than the ICE agents suspected them because of the color of their skin or the language they spoke. We saw law-abiding people who were trying to be on a pathway to citizenship. I remind people about teacher's aide in Milwaukee last year who was deported. This is a person who had no criminal history, a person who was contributing to society, filling a very real need in the community, providing a service as a teacher's aide. That is the problem right now. ICE has been out of control. It's a display of force, and this is ultimately for Donald Trump to try to score political points. But I can tell you that it's backfiring because the people, either in Wisconsin, people all across this country, are rejecting this form of immigration enforcement because it doesn't work. It has made communities less trustful of each other. And so we have to do is hold ICE accountable by not allowing them to go into houses of worship, other sacred places, And we also have to ban use of masks. And also, if you don't have a warrant, you can't just show up somewhere and kidnap a member of our community.
Yeah, a couple of your Dem primary competitors have called for abolishing ICE entirely, argued that the agency shouldn't exist. Do you agree with those points of
Well,
view?
what I want to do is talk about what you can do as a governor. I want to keep this in a perspective. Like those conversations can, those conversations are going to happen and they are better had at the federal level. What needs to happen is a system of accountability because if ICE were to go away, today, it would come back worse, far worse under President Donald Trump. You thought Kristi Noem was bad. Mark Wayne Mullen is going to be even worse on this issue. And about what needs to happen is common sense immigration reform. Because if we had it, ICE would not have the authority and the power to terrorize communities the way that they are doing now. Trump has let them abuse power, and there has been no accountability. We need comprehensive immigration reform at the federal level. We also need systems of accountability in states that prosecutes bad actors, regardless of what immigration enforcement agency it is, regardless of what your stand in the federal government is. If you don't abide by the law, if you don't comply with the law, you should face consequences for that abdication of your responsibility and also your violation of the public trust.
Yeah, you also served as the lieutenant governor under Governor Evers in the past. I'm curious, is there anything you would have done differently than him during his time as governor?
Well, I'll tell you, I'm very grateful for what Governor Evers was able to accomplish given a very hostile legislature. And that's why this race is so important because it's not just about me running for governor. This is about a majority in the state assembly and a majority in the state senate. That is what is required to bring about the real change that people so desperately want in this state. It also gives us an opportunity to be able to have more fair representation. Right now, the legislature, our congressional delegation, does not reflect the political makeup of this state, which is something that we desperately need because for a lack of it, we have to deal with political extremism that has held communities back, that has completely ignored what folks, not just what people want to see, what people need in order for them to live productive lives. We have a majority, an overwhelming majority of people in the state that support raising the minimum wage. A majority of people in the state who support Badger Care expansion. Majority of people in the state who support marijuana legalization in some form, be it recreational or medicinal. But we have not gotten that because we are being led by extremists who lead both houses of the legislature at this moment. So, with that being said, I want to thank the governor, but hoping that we are, and not just hoping, we are fighting for an entirely new legislature to bring about change on day one. And that's why I have made Badger Care expansion a day one priority of mine, made it very clear I will not sign a state budget that does not include Badger Care expansion. We are going to implement full funding of our public schools here in Wisconsin in the first budget for a change so that we can finally get some relief to property taxpayers. And we're also going to close these loopholes that allow the wealthy to get away without paying their fair share. We are going to bring opportunity back to everyday Wisconsinites. We are going to close loopholes for the companies that engage in price gouging, those companies that send jobs overseas, and the companies that have or are looking to outsource our jobs to artificial intelligence.
All right, my final question for you is, a Marquette University Law School poll last month showed about 65% of voters in the race were still undecided. So, what sets you apart from the rest of the Dem field, and why should Wisconsinites choose you to lead the state?
What sets me apart from the rest of the field is the experience that I've had. There's no person in this race that has the statewide governing experience that I have. There has not been as active as a lieutenant governor, at least in my lifetime, in the state of Wisconsin. And having governed during some of the most difficult and challenging moments in this state is what sets me apart. It wasn't just about showing up just to, walk into a coffee shop, walk out. This was about taking on the challenges that confront us. This is about cleaning up the mess that existed and was created for the 8 years prior to us taking office. And then in addition to that, just almost, just 2 years after, not even 2 years after taking office, having to deal with the pandemic. which was one of the most exhaustive experiences that we have faced as a state and as a country. It took time, it took attention and dedication to navigate that. There's not a single person running right now who has that experience. Also, dealing with some of the more fun things like getting around Wisconsin, building relationships. I have strongest relationships across the state, and it's because I've done the hard work, whether it's leading our climate change task force, heading up our Health Equity Council work, our Census Complete Count Committee work, which had Wisconsin with one of the highest counts in the entire country. We could have lost a congressional seat if it was not for the hard work that went into getting us a complete count in the census. Also, the work around rural prosperity initiatives and broadband expansion. I'm the only one that can speak to having been as present all across Wisconsin in good times and in bad times. And given that experience, I am the only candidate with a real plan to address our challenges moving forward from a statewide perspective, because I have been in those meetings with the governor during the budget cycles when I was lieutenant governor, going line by line, figuring out how we were going to prioritize Wisconsinites. And that is another level of experience that doesn't exist in this race. And it's what I use, what I hope to use as the marker to move us forward on day one.
All right. Well, thank you again for joining me on Capital Chats.
Thank you.
All right, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of WisPolitics Capital Chats. If you'd like to learn more about the governor's race in Wisconsin, you can head to our website at wispolitics.com. In the meantime, I'm Kate Morton. Thanks for listening to WisPolitics Capital Chats, brought to you by Spectrum.